We're allowed to have fun.
So colleagues,
Are
I
we
would
ready?
call you to order and let you know that we're live streaming, so everybody's bright and shiny face is now being seen by the public. We are now in open session, and this portion of this meeting is being web streamed. And I would welcome everybody to this electronic council meeting. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, we are now practicing physical distancing, and all the councillors are participating electronically. I would remind all of you to please put yourself on mute until you're acknowledged if you want to speak. When we vote, we will ask you to use yes and no buttons. You all know how to access them. And I would like to begin with a moment of silence, recognizing the victims of Nova Scotia who lost their lives in such a heinous act by one individual, and to the friends and families in Nova Scotia, as well as the residents of Waterloo Region who we've passed away over this past week due to COVID-19. So I'd ask everyone to observe a moment of silence. Thank you, colleagues. I would now ask the clerk, Chris Fletcher, to do a roll call.
Chair Redman.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
President.
Councillor Erb.
Present.
Councillor
Present. Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Present.
Councillor Jowett.
Present.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor Rentz.
Present.
Councillor Gary.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Chance.
Present.
Councillor Strickland.
Present. Councillor
Brevanovic.
Present.
Thank you. All in attendance.
Thank you. I'd now entertain a motion to reconvene into open session. It is moved by Councillor Nowak and seconded by Councillor Lorentz. Would you please use your yes and no button? So that is carried. Thank you, colleagues. I would now ask, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing no declarations, we are on to new business. First item is the financial impact assessment, staffing implications. It's on page 3, I believe, of your agenda package. I would ask Mr. Craig Dyer to review the report. Oh, this is closed. Okay. So pushing the reset button, colleagues. The minutes of the previous meeting, we now have a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meetings is listed. I would ask if there's any comments. This is moved by Councillor Kiefer and seconded by Councillor Harris. These are the closed minutes of March the 11th, 2020, Council of March the 11th, 2020, closed Special Council March 24th, 2020, Special Council March 24th, closed special council meeting April the 1st, 2020, special council April the 1st, 2020, closed committee of the whole April 14th, 2020, committee of the whole April 14th, 2020, and economic development April the 14th. I see no speakers, so all those in favor, please vote, or against, please vote no. That is carried. Thank you, Councillor. Council will have received an information package on Wednesday. It was distributed electronically. Are there any questions or comments on that? I would also draw your attention to a media release that was put out today announcing that Ian McLean has been appointed to the Waterloo Regional Police Services Board. Ian fills a place that has been vacant on the Waterloo Regional Police Services Board, and I know my colleagues, Councillor Kiefer and Councillor Shantz, welcome him as an addition along with Tony Giovinazzo and Rosita C. It's a great board. These are important times, and we welcome Ian to be part of that very important service to residents. We'll now go in a motion to go into committee of the whole to consider reports. This is moved by Councillor Foxton and seconded by Councillor Galloway. Would you please vote at this time? Okay, that is carried. We have one motion to accept the finance reports items A through G. If anyone has any comments, would you please raise your hand? Seeing none, we now have a motion moved by Councillor Jaworski and seconded by Councillor McGarry. I would ask you to vote on the reports. There's a finance report with a recommendation that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo approve procurement of 42 striker power cots for paramedic services from Rowland Emergency Vehicle Products, Inc. in the amount of $2,065,391 plus applicable taxes set out in the report dated April 22nd, 2020. Another motion about hauled wastewater receiving station. A motion about Northumberland Street from CPR tracks to Stanley reconstruction in the township of North Dumfries. Another motion about Regional Road 58, Fisher-Hallman Road improvements from Rockwood Road to Strasburg Creek and Strasburg Creek Culvert. Amendment to the Transportation Capital Program by advancing for the project on Fisher-Hallman Improvements Project 2021 and 2022 to 2020, and improvement of an increase in the project gross and net to facilitate undertaken on behalf of the City of Kitchener. And the rest as they are written before you, and those are passed. So thank you, colleagues. Preliminary financial impacts. Now we get to call on Mr. Dyer.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And we have provided for Council on the addendum agenda an overview of the financial impacts related to COVID-19. And it's a relatively long report. Took a fair bit of time to put together, a lot of work by people across the organization. I have a brief slide deck, Madam Chair, if it's appropriate. I can just walk through the main highlights of the report.
Thank you, Craig. I think that'd be great. People would like that much better than me reading the whole recommendation. So take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to attempt again to share my screen. Hopefully this is going to work. I'm hoping people can see that. Great. So I'll move through this. I'll move through this fairly quickly. We'll start off with this is becoming a regular feature at committee and council meetings, and I expect it will be so for some time. We provided our initial report on the preliminary overview of the impacts back in March, and then provided an update report in April with the deferral of certain fee and charge increases that were scheduled to come into effect on April 1st. And as we had indicated back at that time, we were planning and have now brought forward a report that attempts to quantify those original impacts that we had identified in the report back on March the 24th. And that's really the purpose of this report that's before you this evening, is to give you our current assessment of the overall financial impact on the region. And generally, we've structured the report in terms of looking at the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on 2020 operating revenue and expenditure. We'll talk a little bit about some of the cost containment measures that the region has put in place. Not listed here, but should be here, is just a quick overview of some of the additional funding that has been received from the federal and provincial governments. A recommendation with respect to certain budgeted service expansions that had been originally included in our 2020 budget, and a little bit about cash flow and next steps. And so kind of going, straight to the numbers, and providing an overview of what's in the report. As we had indicated back on March 24th, the region has been experiencing a significant drop in certain user fee revenue. And those are listed on this slide. And as you can see, they total approximately $4.9 million per month. So this is a monthly number, and these numbers are in thousands. So you read it as $4.9 million as the estimated revenue loss. And with the lion's share of that, perhaps not surprisingly, being with respect to our public transit system. So as of the middle of March, we were collecting very little revenue through our GRT service, and council made the decision to make it a free service for the months of April and May. So during that duration, that's about $3.5 million a month. We have a $40 million annual fare revenue budget at the region. Other areas where and that represents, over 70% of the overall revenue loss per month. Other areas, Provincial Offences Act, red light camera revenue with a dramatic drop in the amount of fines and red light camera charges. Anticipating that is going to be a reduction of about $560,000 a month. Waste management, we've seen a reduction in the amount of commercial industrial waste coming to our sites. That means fewer tipping fees. We also have a relatively weak market for the sale of our recycled products. In total, we anticipate that to be about $250,000 a month. We've also, our childcare centers are closed with the exception of the two that have been opened up to provide important service for frontline workers. We're not collecting any revenue. That's about $185,000 a month. And then with respect to our housing units, we're a landlord to approximately 2,600 tenants. A number of those tenants have experienced employment loss and therefore income loss as well. And that's affected the amount of rent that they pay at our units at about $175,000 a month. Lower volumes at the airport as well, about $120,000 a month, and I'll leave the rest there for you to look at. Smaller in nature, but again, totaling about $4.9 million per month. And so since I would say about the middle of March, third week of March, staff have been looking at various options that are in place in order to provide some cost containment in order to offset this fairly significant revenue shortfall. So some of the things that have been put in place, discretionary training, conferences, travel, all suspended. The recruitment of all non-critical positions has also been suspended. Certain student positions were terminated before their expiry, and we've had the delay and cancellation of a number of summer student positions, which would be effective early May. As previously reported to council, as previously approved by council, a reduction in conventional bus service at about 25% of our service hours, effective April 20th. And we do note here that we're in the process of taking a look at our capital program, and we intend to report back to council in May. Just a little bit further detail with respect to staffing. Earlier this month, temporary layoff notices were provided to a number of staff, part-time casual staff in our libraries and museums predominantly. That has affected, along with some of our summer student contracts, a total of 179 individuals. Again, that was effective early in April. A second round of layoffs and some deployments will be taking place late this month and in the early part of May, affecting in total about 120 staff. And a result of the reduced schedules and ridership with GRT, approximately 90 GRT staff will be laid off, with 11 of them being redeployed. And so we've taken a first attempt at quantifying most of those items, again, for the purpose of this report, in the same manner that the most significant fare reduction was in transit. The service level reduction that has been approved results in about $1.7 million per month in savings. Going back to the staffing items that I've just described, the non-critical positions that we've held vacant, we're estimating at this point about $370,000 a month. Canceled summer student positions will save us a little over $300,000 a month for the 4-month period from May till August. The initial staff layoffs in early April are about $200,000 a month. And with this next round of layoffs, that's about another $265,000. These numbers are going to be updated regularly as to the extent that the numbers and number of individuals might change, and we'll keep providing updates to council. Two other items to note here: fuel. The dramatic drop in the price of fuel has generated many headlines, certainly over the last couple of days. We're anticipating at this point that we're savings in the area of about $240,000 a month for fuel. And similar with the nonprofit and cooperative housing providers who we provide subsidies for, to the extent that their tenants are impacted through loss of employment and loss of income, we're anticipating that housing subsidies to those housing providers will increase by about $230,000 a month. And then some minor adjustments for IT resources and network capacity. In total, that generates about $2.8 million in savings net over the course of each month. And then when we kind of put those two together, we're currently estimating that our shortfall per month is in the area of $2 million. Now, we need to qualify this a little bit. There are certain items in our budget that, as of yet, we have not been able to put together a credible estimate of their impacts. So items such as tax write-offs and supplementary taxes. Extremely difficult to say right now how these are going to be impacted. We know that the ARB Assessment Review Board is not sitting. We also know that the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation is not out there getting new properties and improved properties onto the assessment roll. So it's very unclear to us right now what the impact on tax write-offs and supplementary taxes will be over the course of the year. The other significant item, potentially significant item, is development charge revenues. So and exemptions. So to the extent that the pandemic is impacting development projects, the issuance of building permits, and the construction industry's ability to get projects completed, I think it's reasonable to expect that we're going to see a drop in development charge revenues. It's very difficult for us to quantify. We're still actually waiting for our first full month, the month of April. We'll have those numbers sometime in the month of May. That may give us an early indication of the impact on development charge collections. And then most importantly, these types of updates, I think, are going to be a regular feature at both Administration and Finance Committee meetings and at future council meetings. It's our intent as staff to keep council as up to date as possible with respect to the ongoing financial impacts of this public health emergency. And we'll be updating these numbers regularly over the next few weeks. There's an appendix in the report that outlines some of the additional funding that's been received. Most importantly, additional funding through the Community Homeless Prevention Initiative and for housing-related matters from the federal and provincial governments, totaling about $5.5 million. We have some explanation in the report as to how that money is being used, and we'll be providing further details with respect to the use of that $5.5 million in upcoming reports. We do also note in the report that the economic statement delivered by the Minister of Finance back on March the 25th indicated some additional funding for ambulance service. We're still waiting for a notification from the ministry as to how much of that funding will make its way to the region of Waterloo. And I would also acknowledge that the transition funding related to public health, which was originally going to be in place just for 2020, has now been extended into 2021. And then the final item for discussion is budget issue papers. So again, under the category of cost containment and looking for ways to offset the revenue reduction, staff have reviewed the 8 or 9 budget issue papers, service expansions that were approved as part of the budget. Several are recommended to proceed as planned. 3, all being related to conventional Grand River Transit bus service, are recommended now to not proceed in 2020, given the dramatic reduction in ridership. We're running at about 30% of our normal ridership, as well as the service reductions that council has already approved. It seemed both impractical and illogical to proceed with service expansions this year. And so staff are recommending that we do not proceed with those 3 conventional service enhancements. And so, Madam Chair, our key messages for council today, we're estimating a $4.8 million revenue shortfall. However, some offsetting expenditures to date at $2.8 million brings our net shortfall per month to about $2 million per month. Staff are recommending that council does not implement the 2% GRT fare increase scheduled for July 1st, and that we kind of hit pause on the elimination of age-based transit discounts, which were also scheduled to come into effect on July 1st. Staff would report back on both of those items at some appropriate date in the future. As I said earlier, recommend not proceeding with the planned conventional bus service expansions in 2020. That would also require an amendment to the 2020 capital program. And then we should acknowledge our federal and provincial government partners have committed $5.5 million so far to assist with housing and homelessness matters at the region. And the region is also requesting that the federal and provincial governments provide additional financial assistance to municipalities in order to help offset the significant financial impact of the COVID pandemic. And with that, Madam Chair, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll attempt to stop the screen sharing and would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, it was an excellent presentation, Craig, but there's lots of questions. Councillor Galloway?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Craig and staff, for putting this together. It's a bit of a pig in a poke, I suppose, and it's probably going to change as time goes on and as things unfold. It's certainly going to be a fluid situation. Of course, I think it goes without saying, disappointed, but agree with the recommendations to defer the conventional transit expansions and some of the fare changes that we had anticipated, including the fare increase. All of those, of course, under the circumstances, are not warranted to go ahead at this time. So hopefully in the new year or at some point in time in the future, we'll be able to carry on in how we had proposed with the master plan. But again, things are fairly fluid. A couple of questions, Craig. Has the province, we've had the staff up a bit, and I'm sure there's been all kinds of additional expenses associated with public health in dealing with the pandemic and the great job that our public health department is doing. Have we heard from the province yet? I didn't see anything, unless I missed it, that there was there's money for some housing, there's money for a few different areas. Is there some additional funding from the province or the feds, but more likely the province, for our public health unit and the increased costs there?
Mr. Dyer?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, at this point, I'm not aware of any announcement that's public health specific. The only item which I referred to earlier was more of a transition matter as we head into 2021, but I haven't heard anything specifically about additional costs for public health at this point.
Now, did you identify in your increased cost part of the ledger additional public health costs? We have hired some additional staff, and I'm sure there are pressures on their budget from a variety of aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, through you, Madam Chair, so we haven't identified anything specifically just yet. It will be on our list of things to take a closer look at for the next update. I'm not aware. I think that we've had a number of positions within public health that we have had to keep vacant. So I think we have some offsetting savings to deal with some of those additional costs, but we'll be certainly taking a closer look at that in advance of our next update.
Okay, thanks. And one further thing, Madam Chair, is, and Craig, you did allude to the fact that we will be looking to the province, most likely the province, I don't know about the feds, but the province particularly, to help municipalities, including ours, deal with these either increased costs or loss of revenues. Of course, we only have one source, or generally one source of revenue, and that's property taxes. And it's not really where a pandemic should be funded from, I would suggest, and the various costs associated with it, including particularly the loss of transit revenue associated with the pandemic. Has the province at this point in time given any indication that they're considering that? I know there's no formal announcement, but are they even considering that? And I'm assuming that AMO will be making a proposal, or will be lobbying the government, and along with, I'm sure, a few other trade or municipal organizations. But has the Premier or any minister broached the subject so far? And then I guess the follow-up to that is now a time, or should we, and I guess this would be probably more to you, Madam Chair, is now is the time, or we should hold fire for a while on what we might discuss with the area MPPs or ministers in regards to this.
Craig, do you want to jump in first?
I can give that a try. So I would say I think the province has acknowledged the impact that the COVID pandemic is having on municipalities. I think it's fair to say that the impact will vary by municipality, in part based on the levels and types of services for which they're responsible. I think it's also fair to say that it would appear that municipalities with transit as a service are significantly impacted. As you saw from our table on the revenue side, over 70% of our revenue loss per month relates to transit. So I think there's going to be a wide range of impacts across the province. I think the province has acknowledged the impact on municipalities, but haven't made any formal announcements as of yet from a funding perspective.
So just to tag on to Craig's comments, Tom, I'm in weekly phone calls with the local MPPs as well as local MPs. So we continue to feed these statistics up through the food chain as well. There are organizations, AMO is one of them, but there are a few other specifically looking at transit that are lobbying the government and giving them the kind of information that Craig has just supplied to us about how much bleeding is happening on a monthly basis, and also projecting on how we're going to recover from this and how long it will take to get ridership back up. So definitely using all of the tools in our kit. That's an ongoing conversation. Do you have any other comments?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to Craig for the report. And first off, I'd like to ask a question, and that is, Craig, when you're talking about revenue risk going forward, you mentioned supplementary taxes. Can you remind all of us what our budgeted number is for supplementary taxes in 2020?
So through Madam Chair, so I probably don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but let's say round numbers. I think we budget about $11 or $12 million for supplementary taxes and about $7 or $8 million for write-offs. So there's a net, let's call it, if you net it out the two, it's somewhere in the $3.5 to $4 million net range. And my point earlier was that both of those items are extremely difficult to project at this moment. You know, take the Assessment Review Board. They're not sitting. They haven't been sitting for some time. It just raises a whole bunch of questions. When will they start sitting? What will the backlog look like? How quickly will they get through the backlog? How much of that is going to get processed by the end of October to make it onto next year's roll? Extremely difficult for us to project at this point.
Well, thanks. I guess that's part of the point that I like to make. And you know, when we first had this preliminary report over a month ago, we were looking at approximate revenue loss per month of $5 million. That number seems to be pretty accurate. But what we've done in the last month in terms of those cost containment strategies, which have been approved by council, has been such to reduce that kind of revenue loss to net $2 million. And so that is, unprecedented in regional history. I don't believe there's ever been a time when we've run a deficit to that extent. So I think even though the number is smaller than what we had anticipated, I think it's still very significant. And the other point I'd like to make with respect to that is it's not so much the snapshot in time, which is really concerning. It's also the economic challenges that we're going to face post-pandemic. And that's where we're going to see the risk to our budget on supplementary taxes, which you identified about $4 million. Increased revenue risk to transit in terms of trying to get a ridership back. Tax deferrals, taxes not coming in, people not being able to afford their taxes. And I'm not overstating it. I think it's important to recognize that while $2 million is significant, I think we're going to have much bigger financial challenges ahead when all of these factors post-pandemic with respect to impact on economy come home to roost. So I think it's critically important for this recommendation that we continue to do whatever cost containment measures we can, and also recognize that all municipalities in Ontario and across Canada are in similar situations and are going to require not only provincial, but more likely federal help. And I know there's been some discussions, further to Councillor Galloway's point earlier, that I'm not even sure the extent of this revenue shortfall for municipalities, that the provinces are going to have enough fiscal capability to provide for that balancing of the budget after the COVID has passed. So I think that we're talking billions of dollars, multiple billions of dollars across Canada. And I think it's going to require federal government help in addition to whatever the provinces can do. So I think that we need to recognize that this is a snapshot in time. It gives us a good idea of what may be coming ahead of us, but there are going to be intensified revenue risks, and we have to be prepared for them the best way we can and continue to do what we can with respect to cost containment. So I appreciate the report, and I like the direction that it's heading in, and have to just doubly emphasize that we're going to need senior level of government support to get through this for the next year to 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair, to Commissioner Dyer, and I'll ask Commissioner Schmidt to listen in. A couple of things on the UPass. So as you know, the universities aren't going to be in session, or going to be in session remotely over the summer. Just wondering, A, if that has been taken into account in part of this. And then second, later in the year, we're going to look at automated speed enforcement. And if we all recall, that was very much a heavy upfront investment. I just wondered if that has been taken into account yet.
So I can.
Mr. Dyer? Yep.
Yep, I can try both. So definitely the absence of UPass revenue taken into account as part of the revenue shortfall shown for transit. So yes, so definitely taken into account. And I understand Mr. Schmidt and his team are working on a draft report, I believe, with respect to automated speed enforcement, but I'll let Mr. Schmidt expand.
Mr. Schmidt?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we are reviewing the automated speed enforcement, either from the perspective of simply delaying it until a better time, or looking at, are there ways for us to implement it with possibly less sites. I think we had 32 sites proposed. We could look at a lesser number of sites, but we also have to have discussions with POA on whether they're actually able to deal with the tickets. So there's just a number of factors involved. I know many councillors and municipalities want to have the ASE as a toolkit to reduce speeding, but we're going to have to reassess what we can do over the next 6 months.
Excellent. Glad both are on your radar screens and taken into account. Finally, to Mr. Dyer, with respect to, as you know, the lower tiers collect the property taxes. We're all in this together. And as you mentioned, certainly a heavy hit on transit, which benefits so many people throughout our communities. Just wondering, as you know, we've stopped at the lower tier. The lower tiers have stopped collecting interest and taxes, and so some people will not be paying their taxes, but there's a flow through. I'm just wondering if the area treasurers have given thought to beyond 60 days, what might happen and how the region might take that into account for the lower tiers in terms of that flow through, if at all.
Mr. Dyer?
Yes, absolutely. Through you, Madam Chair. So yes, we've absolutely been talking about it. Those discussions started, I'm going to say, a week or two ago. We're having weekly calls with all of the treasurers, and we intend to discuss this in some detail tomorrow afternoon. And so that will lead to, I suspect, further staff reports coming forward, not only here at Regional Council, but at all the local councils.
Wonderful. Thank you for all the thoughtful responses and all the work that staff have done to Mr. Murray. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Councillor Bravanovic?
Thank you very much, Chair Redman, and thanks to staff for the thorough report. I guess my first question really goes to Mr. Schmidt, and it has to go with the transit master plan. I do, understand why we're moving forward in the manner that's been suggested. I'm just wondering, in the areas where we're not proceeding until next year with the expansion, were there any particularly sensitive requests or routings that were being met through either of those two proposals? I forget the details of them from back at budget time that might be a concern for council as they consider this tonight, or for the community for that matter.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I don't think there were any specific routes that were a huge issue or problem. I think our plan overall will be that many of these will come back through the budget process for next year and be reviewed at that place. So I don't think we see this as permanently stopping. We see it as more of a pause and then getting back to looking at service expansions, hopefully next year. I would say, though, that many of the service expansions that were planned were in Cambridge. So many of them, the majority were in Cambridge.
So I guess specifically, I seem to recall there was something associated with, and I can't remember if it was separate from these or part of this, associated with Freeport Hospital. And I just want to make sure, particularly with the increased traffic likely to Freeport, that's not being jeopardized.
I do have Director Zink is here, so he may be better able to answer the specifics, and it may also be addressed by the subsequent report that we have looking at service reductions on routes that are not used. Peter, are you?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. The Freeport Hospital has been discussed in the context of our alternate service delivery models that we had presented to council several times. What we're envisioning is the 901 that operates as a bus plus service through the campus right now at Freeport. We would look at blending that with Route 27. So that's probably the service change that you're looking at. It was not included as part of the service expansion packages that were approved previously.
Okay, great. That's reassuring to hear. But Thomas, just to be clear, the motion that's on the table today is simply to not proceed with them in 2020. It's not asking us to revisit this in 2021. It's like we're just simply delaying this, correct? The way you phrased it caused me some concern there.
I suppose, through Madam Chair, I suppose that's up to council how they want to do that. To do it in 2021, it does have to go through a budget process. So in some way, these proposals need to move through those budget process. I suppose council could look at them as, I'll say, pre-approved, or have them have priority during the budget process, but in some way they do have to move through that process and be approved for implementation next year.
Well, I guess what I would suggest is, I think that these have, and Madam Chair, I would argue that these have been approved, and for us to not approve them would actually require a motion to reconsider, which I think is a different issue than if we approach it from the perspective that we're simply delaying implementation until 2021. And I don't think we should be going back and having this debate and arguing it at budget time next year. Those decisions have been made. We've debated them. All we're doing is delaying. And so I want to make sure that the wording as presented and as interpreted by the clerk is in fact that, because otherwise I would argue that it needs to be those things would need a motion to reconsider.
I'm going to ask Mr. Murray to comment, but I would agree with your interpretation that we're just saying not this year. But Mr. Murray, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think we were we're clear in our staff recommendation, which is not proceed in 2020. That's as much as we're talking about right now. What happens down the road, I think, frankly, everybody has to wait and see. We don't know what things are going to look like 4, 6, 8 months from now, or when we're into the 2021 budget process. So what staff are recommending at this time is not proceeding in 2020 with those budget issue papers. Okay,
well, and I'm prepared to support that, and would want that noted in the minutes that in fact that is, what is being talked about here, because I unless there's a conscious presentation by staff next year to actually pull back on decisions that have been made, I believe that is simply a question of a new date from a starting point of view. The second,
go ahead. I would agree with your interpretation, Councilor Urbanovich, and there was a lot of discussion about that. So as it reads, the recommendation is not to proceed in 2020. But you have another question?
Yes, thank you for that reassurance, Madam Chair. The second issue, Mr. Dyer, is on the issue of the shelter system. You've acknowledged the money that's coming in, what we're spending some of it on. There's going to be a more detailed report coming. But I think the bigger issue, and I know this is being talked about by a lot of my colleagues across the country, is that our shelter system is going to need to look very different when we come out of this. And so I'm wondering how much we have started to think about that and or factor that into any of the numbers that you've looked at so far. Or is that sort of down the road that you're going to look at that? Because that is going to, I think, have a significant financial impact on us.
Mr. Dyer or Mike, do you want to take this?
If I could. So what I would say is I think the numbers in this report just reflect the immediate response. And all of the extra costs, been significant extra costs incurred over the last month, and we anticipate that that'll continue for another month or two. So, opening up a new overflow shelter, moving House of Friendship to motels, up-staffing, there's been significant additional costs. So that's the focus of this report. I can tell you that discussions have started already internally between myself, Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, Ryan Petitpierre, about what's the medium to longer term plan for operating shelters safely. And I don't think there's a clear answer to that yet, but I can tell you that the right people are turning their minds to that right now.
Great, thank you. The next thing I want to talk about is the advocacy piece. And first of all, Chair Redman, I want to really acknowledge you because I know that you've been doing yo person service as chair of Marco, and both amongst Marco and amongst the I forget what you call the MOU table. The MOU team. Thank you. In terms of advocating for our region and for all the communities, quite frankly, across Ontario with the provincial government on some of these issues, as well as with our MPPs and MPs. Similarly, I think it's important to let council know that there's significant dialogue going on through FCM and the Big City Mayors Caucus with the federal government on this issue. We've been having weekly meetings with the Deputy Prime Minister and advocating really on three fronts. The first front being the general backstopping that needs to happen for municipalities around the losses that we're incurring. Secondly, the backstopping that needs to happen for municipalities like the region on transit systems, and the monies there are huge. The biggest one, of course, being the City of Toronto, where Mayor Tory is losing $20 million a month $20 million a week in transit revenue as an example. And then the third component is really starting to look at a economic stimulus program as we come out of COVID, and using the basis of the one that existed in 2010 in that economic recession as a fundamental starting point of the dialogue, recognizing that investing in municipal economic stimulus is one of the most effective ways for the federal government, in partnership with the feds, the province, and municipalities, has happened in 2010 to really stimulate the economy and get things going. And you may have seen some FCM social media and so on around that, and there'll be more in the days ahead as we accelerate some of that advocacy. Admittedly, the federal focus has been initially on Canadians first and foremost, which makes sense. Businesses secondly, and now they're getting to the point of really looking at us and other more systemic issues. So I think council can expect to hear more on that in the weeks ahead.
Thank you for all your good work. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. My question has to do with the emergency childcare. I saw that the fact that a to be determined amount of funding is anticipated from the province. I didn't see whether we had the costs reflected on the other side of the books. I think it's significant. We referenced the fact that we have 2 centers open now, but my understanding is we are bringing 2 more online imminently as the province has expanded the list of emergency workers that are eligible for that. That's not going to be cheap childcare. Not only does it have enhanced staff numbers to deal with COVID, but it also has expanded hours to support the emergency workers. My hope would certainly be that the funding that comes from the province will cover those costs and it'll be a wash, but we really don't know that, do we?
Mr. Dyer?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's a fair comment. We certainly haven't included at this point costs associated with the next 2 to open. Our assumption from a from a net position so far is that any incremental costs that we are incurring to provide the service at the 2 centers that are open will be funded from the province. That's our assumption so far. As we learn more about what this the funding program looks like, then we'll update our estimates.
Councillor Clark?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foxton?
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Mr. Dyer very much for his work. It's not an easy job. As we know, this is just a brief snapshot of certain things. A lot has not come into the open yet. I totally agree with Councillor Strickland, and I thank him for bringing up the points that he did bring up, in that this is not going to be easy to come through. I would like us to say we can go ahead with 2021. I'm not sure we can, but we're not at that point to even analyze or look at that yet. But we also have to remember that businesses are closing. People are going to be unemployed after this. Some of them are finding it hard to pay their bills now. This is not going to be an easy thing to come through. The decisions we make and how we move forward to help these people will allow us to come out of this. But it's going to be, I think, a lot slower process. And I think it's going to be a lot longer in effect. And I appreciate all the councillors and their thoughts and what they're thinking. We need the Barry Vervanabooks pushing us ahead, trying to get us to get back into business. We need the Sean Strickland saying, don't forget this. I appreciate you all very much. We got a lot of work to do in a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. Councillor Rentz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too would like to thank Councillor Strickland for his words of wisdom. I'm glad to see that, Craig, that you're working with the local treasurers and your group to look at some of the problems we have. I don't think it's just property taxes, residential property taxes, that I think you have to be worried about. I think you have to be worried about commercial property taxes, commercial development property taxes, some in industry taxes. We're planning to come out of this where people will go back to their jobs, but I'm not so sure if commercial developments fail. All these small businesses that are in there, even multinationals, the employees expect to go back to their jobs. So this thing could really be a huge problem for us, and I think we need to get out in front of it. And I agree with Councillor Ivanovic. I think this is a federal issue. The federal government needs to step in and at least show some leadership in how they're going to be able to backstop municipalities when we stop losing that tax revenue, not just on a monthly basis, but weekly. So I think we have an awful lot of work to do, and I'm hoping that we can have more testing in our communities, so we can have a better handle on what's happening in our communities. And I think that's where we need to start to get people back on the road and back to work.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Councillor Kiefer. Hit your bar, Carl. You have to hold it down.
Hold it down and keep holding it down?
Yeah, and we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to talk about transit here. I'm not happy about the fact that we're going to have to put another delay on the transit in Cambridge. I know it's going to happen supposedly next year, but there's even some question around the horseshoe that it's not going to happen. I mean, transit is an essential service, and we're right in the beginning of phase 2, which, you know, God only knows what kind of delays we're going to see there with the situation. And we all know that we want the LRT to come through and to be completed. We're a long ways from it, and I'm just concerned about the delays. So I'm on the same page as Councillor Strickland and Councillor Lorenz and Councillor Fox in there with the fact that we've got to, I think, go after the federal government as well as the provincial government. I mean, I think the province understands how important the transit situation is. And some of the people that don't have the luxury of having cars and vehicles, they need to be able to get around. And as Councillor Foxton said, you know, when we come out of this thing, you know, these people have got to, you know, get some jobs and work and go back to work again. But it's great that phase 2 is there, and I'm happy that phase 1 is completed. But I just worry, and I'm not happy about the fact that we have to take this route. And I know the circumstances are such that we have to make some of these decisions, these tough decisions. But thank you for listening.
So, Councillor Kiefer, I think that's a fair comment, and I would just remind all of us that Mr. Schmidt and his team are still working at bringing the phase 2 proposal, working through the design phase, working through the environmental assessment, so that when and if the federal government and the provincial government want to look at for infrastructure, as Councillor Bravanovich was saying, we'll be poised at a good position. So that work is still continuing.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm very aware of that. I sit on the committee for that transit portion, and but I'm concerned that we need to continue to lobby the federal and provincial governments on a constant basis, and not just sit back and say, well, okay, it's nice if you're going to do this, or it's nice if you're not going to do it. I don't want to see that. I want us to go after them aggressively. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Craig and staff, for this very informative report. My question, I think, it will be for Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, and it's Councillor Urbanovic touched a bit on it, and it's the shelter system, the housing, all of the money, which over $5 million we've got from the provincial government. And there's no question that the most vulnerable in our community are going to probably have the most difficult time recovering from the pandemic, and a whole new structure will have to be put in place. So while we've got all this money now, we have no guarantee that kind of money is going to continue. And I'm wondering if there's any conversation between your colleagues and the provincial government as to what level we might anticipate this funding to continue, so that these people who are most affected by the pandemic now will be able to care for them in a proper way.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. we haven't had that discussion at the moment, but what we have been notified by both the provincial and federal governments is that this is one-time money. This is not going to be ongoing funding that we receive. We have had some limited discussions with our partners in the community that we do have to put our minds to what the system needs to look like in the long run. But at the moment, we're just keeping our heads above water, dealing with the current situation, and haven't really got the time to be investing in what the system will look like in the long term. But as Mr. Murray said, we have begun to think about it, and we will make sure that it's a priority as we move forward.
Good, because we need to continue to be the voice for those that don't have the voice, and that we can advocate for them. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the report. A few of my questions have already been answered, but on the childcare issue, I know that at the moment the province hasn't necessarily come forward with any money in order to pay for those services that we're providing for free, but has that question been asked? I know that at the mayor's level here, I also am in contact regularly with our federal and provincial partners, but is there any movement ahead from the province on paying for the childcare for our emergency workers?
Mr. Bartholomew Saunders. Yep.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. What I can say to you is that we have been aware of the cost of what it's costing us to put in the emergency childcare, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of twice the regular cost of childcare, just because of the added requirements that are there. The difference in the staffing because of the nature of the numbers of children that we can have, plus the physical distancing, et cetera, it's costing us much more. What we did, as did other municipalities across the province, was we showed those numbers to the province before we began operating emergency childcare. And we have been told by the province to press on, to go ahead and spend it. So we're making the assumption that by having told the province of what the costs are and how expensive it is, and their assurance that we should press on, that there will be money at the end of the day to cover the full expense.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll add that to the list of items that I discussed with our provincial partners. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Redman. While we're all throwing our weight around about getting some advocacy done, I had a restaurateur call me today, very, very concerned because it's the precarious employment sector that seems to have been left out of some of the solutions that are coming down the pipe. For example, we know in our region that there's a segment that is, a paycheck away from joining our incredibly worrisome homeless population. And so precarious employment is a sector that is able to take advantage of a certain amount of the funds. But in the end, at the end of the 6 to 8 weeks, the restaurateurs will not be coming back the same way. Even if they come back at 50% capacity, the margins are just not there to sustain themselves, to be able to employ everyone the way they were employed before. So if there's opportunities, Redman, when you are speaking to some of the other levels of government, can you remind them of the precariousness of our restaurateurs who just won't be able to accept everyone back again, and what that could mean to our region and the homeless population that we already have?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I see no other speakers. Thank you, staff, everyone who weighed in with answers, and thank you, Craig, for a great report. This report is moved by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Harris. There is no further discussion. I would ask you to vote with your buttons. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Committee reports, the committee of the whole. We will now, we're going to move into committee of the whole. This motion is moved by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Jowett. Please use your yes and no buttons. So is this what we're voting on, these two things?
That's the summary.
So colleagues, we're voting on the summary of recommendations of the Committee of Whole as presented by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Jowett. Sorry?
These were the items. And then there was a closed item too.
Sorry?
There was a closed item.
As you vote, colleagues, I just want to be clear that there is a closed item in this motion that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo approved the settlement with Century Group Inc. for a contract 2017-159 Grand River Transit Fairway Road Station, and the increase to the contract in the amount of $347,000 for a total contract price of $3,490,300 plus applicable taxes. So that is part of the motion that you're now voting on. That is carried. I think we still have a few people voting. Tim? Are you guys re-voting? Okay, we're going to vote now. The joy of electronic meetings. So active, and is Matthew going to speak to it? So Rod will, okay. Okay, Councillor, that is carried. Thank you. Next, we're going to be dealing with Economic Development Committee. There is a report from the Economic Development Committee, and I'm wondering before we put it forward with a motion if Mr. Regier would like to speak to this. I don't think Matthew Chandy is with us.
Hello, Chair Redman. I think Matthew is actually available.
Oh. Okay, if Matthew is here, thank you, Rod. Matthew, are you with us?
Perhaps not. So we have the two recommendations. One with regard to the Province of Ontario Mega Job Sites Challenge, and that we are authorizing staff to, we're asking for direction to submit their application for the Provincial Ontario Job Sites Challenge based on the associated information in the report. Yeah, apologies for that. Is that the report that you wanted to start with?
No.
Okay, but we're going to, the first one is moved by Councillor Jowett and seconded by Councillor Vrvanovich. And it's a summary of the recommendations of the Economic Development Committee presented by Councillor Jowett, that the summary of the recommendations of the Economic Development Committee dated April 14th, 2020, items 1 to 2 be adopted as follows. I thought there might have been a
It's regards to this one, where it's Cambridge Highland Games.
who are members of the Economic Development Committee, you will remember this. It has to do with the grants. And my understanding is that Councillor Jowett, you were approached by the Cambridge Highland Games and they are withdrawing their application. Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Chair Redman. I didn't know that they were withdrawing their application. Somebody else might have said that. I do know that they've canceled it for this year. Sorry, I don't remember that.
Sorry. Mr. Regier, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, so certainly I can confirm that the Highland Games will be canceling their event for this year. We have not had discussions with them with regard to the implications for their grant, but our assumption at this stage is that it won't be warranted, won't be necessary.
Okay, given that clarification and the fact that there was a active discussion at Economic Development, I'm going to suggest that we leave the recommendations as is if we don't know that they are withdrawing their application. So I'm going to ask the mover and the seconder. This is Councillor Jowett and Councillor Vrvanovich. Are you willing to go with the report as written?
Do we have that in there? Sorry,
Yes.
Chair Redman, is it clear that they've withdrawn or they haven't, or are we taking that out of there for now?
I think we should leave it in because there were a couple of grants that were, we weren't sure whether or not they were going to cancel or postpone, and we thought it was better to provide the funding at this point in time.
Yeah, okay, that's as I remember it. Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll move that.
Okay, and Councillor Kiefer, I see you nodding. That's your recollection too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, it
and
is.
Councillor Vrvanovich, you're good with that? Okay, could we vote? Oh, Councillor Foxton, do you want to speak to this? Are you voting?
No, I wanted to speak. It's bullet number 2 says the Region of Waterloo take the following actions with respect to the Province of Ontario Mega Job Sites Challenge. What is the Ontario Mega Job Site Challenge?
Over to you, Mr. Regier.
Sure. Last year, the province of Ontario announced a competition for identifying large industrial sites that it would then support through a promotion through its economic development and investment programming. There's quite a set of criteria for these sites to be identified. There's no funding associated with the challenge itself. However, there are significant benefits to being recognized by the province as an investment-ready site. So the region, in partnership with the City of Cambridge, has worked to put together an application based on the presentation of what we call the Prime Industrial Strategic Reserve, which is a block of employment lands east of the Grand River in North Cambridge, which comprised, I believe, about 900 acres in 900 gross acres, quite a bit less than that in net acres. And these are already within the urban boundary and they're identified for employment uses. So this was an appropriate submission from the region and the City of Cambridge's point of view.
So you're going to make the site employment ready. Is that what this is for? And you get recognized by the province for doing so?
Well, this is actually, we are presenting, and we're required to present lands in the application that are actually going to be shovel ready in the course of the next 12 to 24 months. And only a portion of these lands will actually be in that state within that time frame. But the area is pretty significant. It's got some excellent attributes in terms of its suitability for employment uses, access to the 401, adjacency to surrounding industrial areas, proximity to the airport, etc. Excellent transportation and power infrastructure and so on. So this was identified as the area. It's already under development. And what we're asking for is provincial recognition through this program that would provide essentially marketing and marketing support primarily from the province. There's no provincial money associated with the application. This won't in any way really accelerate the development of the East Side lands, but it will be helpful in positioning this in the Ontario and in the national and international marketplace.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions? That's great. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Jowett and Councillor Vrvanovich. All those in favor, please indicate with your buttons. Okay, that is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Next, we're going to deal with the Audit Committee. There's a recommendation that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo approve the consolidated financial statements, the sinking fund financial statements, and the trust fund financial statements for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2019, as set out in report COR-FSD-20-12 dated April 22nd, 2020. This is moved by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Jowett. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank staff for another clean audit. We heard from the auditors earlier today, and they were highly complimentary of the staff in regards to this particular audit, which of course, much of which or some of which was done under some very difficult circumstances. So again, another clean audit. We're in good shape, and thanks to staff.
Terrific. Okay, I would ask everyone now to vote on that using your buttons to accept the recommendations of the Audit Committee. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Under other matters, under the Committee of the Whole, we have a report, potential Phase 3 transit service reductions. And I'm going to call on Mr. Schmidt to review this report.
Through you, Madam Chair, following the service reductions that Council approved a few weeks ago, we were asked to take a look at other potential reductions that could be made. And essentially, I think looking at reductions where there was a little impact on our customers, we've identified a fairly long list of potential changes that we feel provide some savings on the order of $250,000 a month while minimizing impact on customers. I think we impact approximately 2,000 weekly passenger boardings. We've also provided some reductions that we're not suggesting should be taken, and these are largely, we feel that the potential savings are insignificant or not enough to justify the impact on passengers. Assuming Council approves these reductions today, we would try to move forward with these as quickly as possible. They may take a little bit of time to get done, but we will move them as quickly as we can. So really up to council if they have any questions, either of the report, all the report, or any of the specific reductions that we have proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 34 of the report, talking about the additional service reductions, they talk about Route 77 into Wilmot, about eliminating it. I think that is a little, at this point, is a little premature. We're coming into the warmer seasons, and there may or may not. I understand there's a reduction in passengers. I've seen the report, and but my concern is that the people that do use it may or may not be part of the essential service. I think there needs to be some kind of a poll done before we actually do the reduction. The cost of Route 77 is borne by Wilmot Township, so we're the ones that are covering the cost of it. So I think that we need to maybe maintain and look at maybe reductions in trips. We could do that, and also we need to get an understanding, because of the fact, give it another 4 to 6 weeks to find out, because we're starting to get into, I mean, one of the stops along the way is for a farm operation, which are the farm hands, the numbers will pick up in about 3 weeks, and they're not sure how many would be using the bus. We do know that there are some that are, but they don't have the numbers at this point, because of the fact that not all the people are there yet. So I think that that's something that should be held off for at least 4 to 6 weeks, and we should be doing it. You know, the drivers, somebody could do a survey to see how if any of the current passengers are part of the essential services.
Mr. Schmidt?
Through you, Madam Chair, I mean, that's no problem. As Councillor Armstrong says, the cost of that is paid for by Wilmot. So we'd be quite happy to work with their staff and review that further and not remove it at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And just while I have the floor, Madam Chair, I just want to express my thanks to everyone that I see on the screen and those that are hiding off screen, the appreciation of all the work, the hard work they're doing, because I know how much work is going on by everybody here, because I'm seeing it with my staff as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Keep up the good work, and make sure you do get rest, please.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Strickland, I had you next. Do you want to make a comment or have a question?
No, I'm fine with the recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I watch the hands go up, and then sometimes they disappear, and sometimes you've taken them down, and sometimes it's just like they go into the ether. So I just want to check. So we've had a discussion, and I guess I would ask the clerk, is that an amendment or just an advisement that the route that Councillor Armstrong referred to would continue operating? It wouldn't have an impact on the bottom line, would it, Mr. Schmidt?
It would have no impact on the region's bottom line.
Good, okay.
Just ours.
So with that understanding, then, this motion is moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Jaworski, that we would approve the service reductions described in the report we've just been talking about. So I would ask you to vote with your buttons, yes or no. That is carried. I would now entertain a motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. And that is moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Erb. So I would ask you to vote with your yes and no buttons. That is carried. I now entertain a motion that the committee of the whole rise and council to resume. Oh, Councillor Harris has a question. Councillor Harris, do you have a question?
Just a comment. Do you want me to do it after this vote?
You can do it now if you want.
All right. I know that Dr. Wong wasn't able to join us on this committee or I guess council meeting tonight. And I know my colleague had mentioned it previously, but I really wanted to thank Dr. Wong and Public Health for their work specifically with regards to the Forest Heights long-term care move of, I think it was 40 residents from that facility. I think we've all been watching the news across Canada, especially here in Ontario with the unfortunate situations we find our long-term care homes in, and the numbers unfortunately going in the wrong direction each and every night. And I'm so happy to see, and I've talked to many people that are happy of the plan that Public Health, along with both our area hospitals, put into place to move those folks out and hopefully, help contain that situation over at Forest Heights. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to Dr. Wong and her team for an excellent job, and we're all in this together. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I think we all echo those comments. I would want to point out that all three hospitals may accept people coming from any of the long-term care homes that are decanted, as happened in Forest Heights. It's not the preferred route, but it was necessary. But it really speaks to the partnerships between Lee Fairclough, who is at St. Mary's Hospital, Sharon Bell, who is part of the Cambridge Health Network, and Dr. Wong. And it's that relationship and those collaborations that have really led to working with the homes in such a positive way. So I think we all join you in acknowledging that hard work on behalf of all the residents of Waterloo Region. I now would entertain a motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. So that's been moved and seconded by Councillor Clark and Councillor Erb. If you could please vote. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. And a motion to adopt the proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. This is moved by Councillor Foxton and seconded by Councillor Erb. That the council adopt the proceedings of Committee of the Whole. I'd ask you to vote. You guys are too fast. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. I have no motions, no notices of motion. Is there any unfinished business? Is there any other business? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to enact the bylaws first, second, and third readings. This is moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Foxton. That is carried, colleagues. Thank you. I would now entertain a motion to adjourn, and this is moved by Councillor Armstrong and seconded by Councillor Shantz. Yes, and colleagues would just remind you, thank staff and the public for joining us this evening. Council is now adjourned, and I would ask council members to please remain where you are because we have an in-camera meeting.
We get 5 minutes.